Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile discussion. One of the announcements that I've been waiting for quite some time has been Ruthless mode. This was originally teased under the name of Hard mode back in 3.15, and it's something that has been one of those things that I think probably 10% of the player base have been waiting for with bated breath, and 90% of the player base are just completely disinterested in. Well, I'm part of that 10%, so I wanted to quickly go through this entire announcement with you and give my thoughts on what I think GGG are doing right with it and what I think they're doing wrong with it. GGG start really by talking about what it isn't, but what I think is worth starting with is what it is. And their announcement says the following: Ruthless is a mode about friction, tension, and anticipation. It's brutally difficult, but overcoming that difficulty feels highly rewarding. In a world where your items are far below par, every item drop has the potential to be the breakthrough one that you're looking for. I think that is what they're really going for, and this is what appeals to me. Essentially, if you're someone that likes the self-found, i.e. the limited access to gear part of solo self-found, but you don't really like the forced solo part, then Ruthless is something that you should check out. What Ruthless isn't, it's not for everyone. If you don't like the sound of it, then it's probably best that you continue playing the regular PathOfExile experience instead. It's like hardcore or solo self-found in that it's harder than the core game and that it restricts your access to items, it restricts your access to options. Some players like the additional constraints as a way of enhancing their game experience, many don't, and that's okay. They should ignore the mode. Maybe test it out. If you're unsure, what I recommend you do is play 320 normally. Once you start getting a bit bored of the league, then at that point, restart in Ruthless and just see whether you have fun or not. If you don't have fun, walk away from it. If you are having fun, then maybe give it a shot in 321. It's not a replacement for regular PoE, it's a challenging mode made for a specific type of player, and changes that are made in Ruthless are not necessarily being tested for the core game. If GGG think they'll make the core game better, they'll just put them into the core game instead. It's not monetized any differently, and it's not something that's consuming any significant development resources. So what Ruthless is, GGG say here, and I think we're going to have to test this out once the mode is actually available. Ruthless is a mode that reimagines traditional understanding of where PathOfExile's endgame is, and that it redefines the entire game as the endgame. Even reaching higher campaign acts, let alone maps, is an achievement. Traditionally, weak items are suddenly very valuable. High-level characters and good rare items infer immense bragging rights. I'm not sure that the settings that are outlined in this document make the game that hard, that it's going to be reaching higher campaign acts is going to be an achievement. Reaching higher campaign acts deathless will probably be an achievement. Reaching higher campaign acts quickly will be an achievement. But I do think that most players who enjoy Ruthless and that are capable of beating the Eternal Labyrinth in the core game will probably have no real trouble getting through the 10 acts. Now, I could be wrong on that, and more information on exactly how hard it is will come out once it goes into alpha. I'm not going to put myself into the alpha, partly because it's under NDA, and I want to have the flexibility to keep making videos about everything about PathOfExile in the interim, and also partly because I'm just going to be very busy in the back half of November. Ruthless is a mode where you barely find any items. You might get to Act 4 without equipping a pair of rings, but each ring you find represents a huge power boost. It's a mode where most items are normal rarity. You don't see a lot of magic items, even fewer rares, but finding a rare item of a base type you're looking for feels amazing. Ruthless is a mode where you find very little crafting currency. You might find only one Orb of Alchemy throughout the entire campaign, but that orb lets you convert any base type of your choice into a rare item. So let's talk quickly about this. Basically, at the moment, the sort of rarity it looks like they're going for the Alchemy Orb is in line with the current core game rarity of the Regal Orb or the Gemcutter Prism. Those are about 20 to 30 times rarer than Alchs, I believe, and you'll typically encounter one of them throughout the campaign. That's one of each, typically one Regal and one GCP. Obviously, variance is a big factor. Sometimes you get 3, sometimes you get 0, but that's the sorts of rarity that we're looking at. Now, this is going to have a big consequence when it comes to mapping. One of the things about PathOfExile's endgame that has been so successful is that running maps feels very different based upon the map mods that are present on them. I feel like GGG might be making a mistake here if they make it so that Orbs of Alchemy are the only way to upgrade a map to rare, and that they're so scarce that people don't really want to use them on maps. We'll have to see how this plays out, but I do think that they should probably consider making it so that maps generally drop rare. And then players who want to scour them, scours are going to be the limiting factor there. So you'll have plenty of access to maps that are rare. They're going to feel different to each other because they're going to have different mods to each other. But if you want to try and get a magic version of a map or a scoured version, then that's going to be harder to source because you'll run out of scouring orbs quickly. That's my initial thoughts, but that is thoughts based upon reading these notes. It is not thoughts based upon actually playing with them. And then they talk about some nostalgia aspects of Ruthless. Some of these are positive. One of them that we'll get to is the single worst thing about Ruthless at the moment, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Item scarcity. The core Ruthless experience is that you don't have strong enough items to handle the content. Every item that drops has the potential to be an upgrade to your current gear. In Ruthless, quantity of items is going to be much lower. The chance of finding rare, magic, and unique items has been massively reduced throughout all game content. Rings, amulets, and belts are much rarer than in the core game and cannot be purchased from vendors. And most league reward systems have been nerfed to only grant item rewards that are specific to that league. So for example, Cluster Jewels will come from Delirium, but you won't get Legion Splinters from Delirium. Plus, you'll also get items from the core drop pool from those mechanics. But the intention, let's see how well this is actually carried out, is that in Ruthless, getting items from the core drop pool is a valuable reward, especially when there is an item rarity bonus in play. Many deterministic items like divination cards and Onigoroshi cannot be obtained. That's a big thing that I wasn't expecting. So one of the things I was thinking of when Ruthless was first announced was that you might actually want to farm the Lover, the Opulent, Destined to Crumble, these sorts of divination cards that are very common drops, and they drop high-level crafting bases that are already rare. I thought they could have been really good in this game mode and really strong options to chase, but it looks like they're not going to be available at all. That's something that is going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. Additionally, many bosses like Atsuri that guarantee unique drops still do, but they are often much harder to access. Next, there's a bunch of things around crafting that also link to item scarcity comments that were made before. In Ruthless, most of your items come from killing monsters. It's hard to find magic, rare, and unique items, and it's even harder to craft them. Crafting is a powerful luxury that you'll have to use very sparingly on the right items. So drop rate of crafting currency items has been massively decreased. The rate at which you receive shards of crafting currency when vendoring items has been decreased. Master crafting and the crafting bench are not there at all. Veiled Chaos Orbs, Binding Orbs, Dominance Orbs, Influenced Exalts, and Awakeners Orbs do not exist. And when an influenced item is reforged or the influence mod is removed, the influence is lost. Most vendor recipes aren't available. A few Ruthless-specific vendor recipes have been introduced. This is going to mean, again, it's doubling down on the whole idea that you don't have items that are strong enough to handle the content, and that every item that does drop has the potential to be the next upgrade you're looking for. This is about making sure that crafting is not the dominant way of getting items. It'll be something that people will do to enhance an existing item, but it's not going to be something that is super dominant. Again, I think this is going to make for a really interesting run through not just the campaign, but particularly white and yellow maps. Running through white and yellow maps when your gear is absolute rubbish is going to be something that will be an interesting new experience. Next, we have the thing that is going to cause you to change your character a fair bit while you're leveling. You are going to be very limited on skill gems and support gems. So in Ruthless, skill gem drops matter and support gem drops matter a lot. Gems cannot be purchased from vendors. There are 2 different quests that are going to give you a token that you can then trade to Sayosa in Act 3 for any skill gem of level 31 or lower. So this is going to get you started with your build. However, you're going to be starting with the wrong support gems a lot of the time. Support gems can only be found as random drops. Realistically, you'll probably be able to trade for them if you're playing trade-enabled Ruthless pretty easily. You cannot obtain them deterministically. Ruthless is a league of item scarcity. When items are scarce, they're exciting to find, exciting to look for, and exciting to trade. We are defining support gems to be items. That means some builds are harder to assemble, and careful planning is needed by SSF Ruthless players. For a bit of an example of what this feels like, in the earlier days of PathOfExile, Castle and Damage Taken was not available from vendors for a period. It was available as an in-game drop, but not from vendors. This was also true of Detonate Mines. Both of these could drop. They dropped at least occasionally when you're playing the game, but you would be able to turn around and sell them to someone that wanted them because those players wouldn't be able to get them via any other means. There was also the case for added chaos support and item rarity support, and also item quantity support, which has since gone legacy. All of these were gems that you could only get through trading with other players or through having them drop for you. And many of them, not necessarily all of them, but many of them were quite good drops when you got them. I remember on one of my first characters, the single best drop that I got, that I remember at least, was a Castle and Damage Taken support. I was able to turn around and sell it for 5 chaos. So that was quite a big drop. And I think you will find that a lot of these support gems They will still drop a fair bit, but not necessarily for you. If you're playing in trade, you'll probably be able to pick them up from other players. I do hope, though, that there are some basic support gems that are available. Not necessarily the best ones for any particular build, but just enough to get you started. However, that's something we'll find out when Ruthless goes live, or potentially when there's leaks from the closed alpha. Gems are going to gain far less experience than they do in the core game. It's a lot harder to level your skills up, which is another access of reduced character power in Ruthless. I'm really glad they did this, because the way that I saw Ruthless going potentially was that everyone played a spellcaster build, because the attack-based builds, they'd have very limited access to good weapons, but then the spellcaster builds would have access to level 20 spell gems, and they would be far, far more powerful. If the gem XP reduction is around the 85% mark, then I think that this should probably work out to be about equal overall. And this will mean that spellcasters and non-spellcaster builds should be roughly equally nerfed by these changes, which means that you'll be able to play whichever one you prefer, rather than feeling like you have to play the one that's nerfed less. And then we have the big one. Almost all movement skills are not available in Ruthless. In this mode, movement skills trivialize game systems that matter a whole lot more, such as terrain layout, monster body blocking, and actual level traversal. Here's a list of movement skills that will not be available in Ruthless. Dash, Frost Blink, Flame Dash, Lightning Warp, Leap Slam, Shield Charge, Whirling Blades, Blink Arrow, Smoke Mine, Body Swap, and Charge Dash. And Venom Guy is collateral damage here because it is linked to Whirling Blades. So this is something that is going to be absolutely transformative. This is going to require much more careful play. And again, as a lot of this is about making it so that this is a mode where the game will be slower. This is a mode where the game will be slower, more tactical, and more dangerous. The get out of jail free card that is a movement skill is going to be a lot worse, and I'm really interested to see how this plays out. Now, there's a concern that's been raised about this by a few people that I think is worth mentioning. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I do think it's worth thinking about. And this is, people are concerned that this may increase the feeling of downtime between packs. So when you kill a pack of monsters and then you're wanting to jump forward to the next one, you're not necessarily going to be able to use a movement skill to close the gap. You're going to need to close the gap manually. And also with the nerfs to Quicksilver Flasks, you're not going to be able to use one of those to speed it up either. Now, whilst this is true, it is going to take longer to move from pack to pack. I actually think that you will spend more time fighting each pack and that this will be the dominant factor. So I think that the actual amount of downtime that's spent during mapping may actually be lower as a result of these changes overall. However, that could be completely wrong. And it could be that the people raising this concern end up being right. Again, this is something we have to play with to be sure. I think it's going to feel quite nasty and quite a shock, but it could also be a lot of fun trying to adapt to this and trying to dodge enemy actions without the crutch that is movement skills. Additional changes. Ruthless is challenging and punitive. It contains a number of changes that make PathOfExile harder and allow skill players to differentiate themselves from everyone else. There is going to be a compounding character XP penalty that starts at level 68 onwards, and that I think might end up creating a situation where like level 80, 85, 87 is going to be where you will probably end up struggling to get further. Of course, I could be wrong on that, and players may get higher than that. We'll have to see how that plays out. Next, we have the single worst thing in this entire list, and really I think that this needs to be revisited because it's going to create a very toxic play environment. Item drops are not allocated to specific party members. Looting is entirely free for all. Yeah, this is just a really bad design idea. This is going to necessitate the use of external blacklists, and those external blacklists will be misused. That is going to be the direct consequence of this. There will be players who will threaten to put people onto an external blacklist unless they do something. There will be all sorts of harassment linked to this. Really, this is going to cause GGG support a lot of hassle, and it is also going to just bring down the level of camaraderie within the environment. I think that this is a really bad idea, and it's even worse in an environment like PathOfExile, where if someone scams you, you are not allowed to call them out in global chat. Yeah, this is just going to end with a lot of toxicity and really needs to be changed. Ultimately, I think that fixing this is so important that Ruthless shouldn't go live until this is fixed. I'm calling it a fix, not a design change, because there's no justification for design this bad. Otherwise, they may as well just make Ruthless solo self-found only. Getting that rant out of the way, that is the one really bad decision that they're making here. Flasks and life and mana are not restored upon entering the town or your hideout. Vendors that sell flasks and Helena in your hideout can refill them for you. This is supposed to disincentivize the strategy of using portal scrolls as an instant full heal. What this will mean in practice is that using a town portal in order to refill your life and mana in the middle of a boss fight is going to feel more like it would if you didn't have a solid state drive, but if you were using a mechanical hard disk drive. So if you're using a mechanical HDD, this process takes a few extra seconds because you've got 2 extra load screens. In Ruthless, it's going to be just like that, except the 2 extra seconds won't be spent on load screens. It will be spent on a de facto load screen, which is walking up to a particular NPC, talking to them, selecting the right thing in their menu, and then walking back to your portal. This really adds nothing, and I don't think it's a good change at all. I'm not aware of any players that make a different strategic decision as to whether or not they take a town portal in the middle of a boss fight based upon whether or not they're using a solid state drive on their present PC, and I don't think that'll be any different here. Onslaught doesn't grant movement speed in Ruthless, and this is because they're basically trying to rein in high player movement speed. I think that this is going to make the Raider feel slightly worse. It's not that the Raider's going to actually be worse at endgame, because most endgame Raiders, that like the Onslaught branch isn't necessarily something you would pick. You'd often go with the other two, but it's going to make the Raider worse during the campaign by far. And it's also going to make things like the Trickster and the Deadeye feel comparatively better. I don't think this is going to be as substantial a change as people thought, but it's still going to be something significant. It's also going to mean that a number of sources of Onslaught on gear are not going to be as worthwhile as they otherwise would be. This one's a big one. If you die near a quest boss in the campaign, a chunk of its life is recovered. This is here to make sure that these are significant bosses. They're not something you can just corpse rush. And this is something that I would term a medium core type mechanic. It's not as brutal as hardcore, but it is something that is meaningfully different to softcore. And it's going to give a lot of the quest bosses a feeling that's more in line with, oh, I've only got 6 portals to beat this boss. That said, we don't know how much a chunk of its life is. We don't know whether this is going to be 25%, whether it's going to be 5%, whether it's going to be 10%, and we'll have to find that out. Next, a bit of a head scratcher. Hardcore Ruthless characters are not migrated to standard Ruthless upon death, they're just permanently dead. I don't see why you would want to remove agency from this. Most people who are playing Hardcore Ruthless, I expect, will just delete their characters, but they don't have the agency to make that decision themselves now. I don't think that this is in any way a particular improvement over the core game, but ultimately I'm not intending to play Hardcore Ruthless, so that doesn't matter for me. Utility Flasks are nerfed. That probably won't surprise anyone. Scarabs only enable mechanics in a map. They don't scale in power with their tiers. Instead, higher tiers of Scarabs are needed for higher tiers of maps, and winged Scarabs don't exist. There is a Ruthless specific Atlas passive skill tree, which is presumably the same as the core tree, just a bit worse. Content from past leagues is encountered less than in regular PathOfExile. I'm going to skip over one. Vile side areas, Enkindling Orbs, and Instilling Orbs don't exist in Ruthless. And then we have 2 more little things that are worth pointing out. Firstly, Ruthless uses its own loot filters. This is a quality of life change that is quite important for people who intend to both play Ruthless and the core game. Then you have the big one. You do not accumulate free Atlas daily missions. This is going to be a really big change. It's going to mean that you're going to have a lot less access to masters, and in particular, that is going to be a lot harder to get to the points in Delve, the key breakpoints like depth 200, where you start seeing a lot more fossils there. So this is going to be something that's pretty significant. One thing I think we'll see as a consequence of this is that there will be players who are going to feel like they need to run a bunch of white tier maps, even once they've progressed past white tier maps, because they're still going to have some interest in the white tier master missions. This will be particularly the case for Betrayal, I think, although we're going to have to play around with all of them to find out exactly how it works. I also think that this is going to mean that if you are someone that is solidly at endgame, you are still going to be interested in running tier 11, 12, 13, 14 maps in order to get those additional red master missions from those. So that's going to be something that will be very much a big change. Atlas missions will not feel like they're unlimited. They're going to feel like a precious resource again, which is really in line with everything else in Ruthless mode. So finally, there is an alpha that's coming up, and that alpha is going to be something that you can opt into by filling in a form over on the PathOfExile website. Link to that down in the description below. There'll be players that will be added to that over the next few weeks, and the alpha will be based on the 3.19 version of the game, and it will not be allowed to be streamed or to be video recorded. I'm not going to participate in it until the NDA is lifted, and then after that, if I've got time, because I'm going to be quite busy in the second half of November, then I will jump into that if I'm able to do so, or alternately, miss out and just go into it fresh when 3.20 hits. Release timeline is that it's going to be coming out alongside the 320 expansion in December. First League with Ruthless active will still be deemed a bit of a beta test, and hence will not be afraid of making mid-league adjustments to Ruthless, something they try not to do very much in the regular game. Now, challenges will not be available in 3.20 in Ruthless. This is something that may come in the future, but for the moment, if you're planning to do the 320 challenges, you're probably going to want to draw a balance between playing Ruthless and playing the core game. We'll have to work that out. And I finally say that Ruthless is a mode where you aren't expected to get to maps. Even if you do get to maps, you're probably not going to reach red maps. If you somehow get there, how will you sustain them with such little access to currency? Will anyone manage to kill pinnacle bosses? Will anyone even see an Uber pinnacle boss? We're very excited to see how this experiment plays out. I very much expect to see all of the pinnacle Uber bosses down, at least in softcore trade-enabled Ruthless. I don't know about hardcore solo self-found Ruthless. That might be a little bit harder to get to that point. But I do think that we will see all of the pinnacle bosses down because all the Uber pinnacle bosses get beaten in things like Gauntlet, and Gauntlet is a harder rule set overall, in my opinion. But that said, that is an opinion that is based on incomplete information. We're going to find all of that out when the league goes live. But for now, I'm going to leave it there. May you be ruthless with your Val Orbs and have interesting results.